I'm Tom Morris. I've been an audio engineer since 1981. Prior to that, I was a chemical engineer.
I'm Jim Morris. Also been an audio engineer since 1981. Went to college for electrical engineering, but kind of went into this right out of the gate, and also still a performing musician. I happen to be his brother.
We are related.
I couldn't tell.
No.
Yeah.
So I don't know which one of you guys wants to start, but kind of just describe how you ended up in Tampa and how you ended up in.
Well, you got here first, so you start.
I better start because otherwise I won't get a word in. Jim and I started a band when we were in college at USF together. And we had the opportunity to go into a recording studio that was on campus called SciComm. And we recorded some songs, a couple of original songs and some cover songs. And that experience of going through the process of recording your own music and creating something from scratch just pushed every button in for both of us. And from that point on, we both knew if we ever had the chance to have our own recording studio, that's what we wanted to do. Unfortunately, recording studios, especially in the 1970s, cost a lot of money. Unlike today, when you can get away with a few $1,000s and have the ability to record things at home, you needed a big investment to start a recording studio in the 70s and the 80s, and we had no money at the time. We were both starving college students. So I graduated as a chemical engineer and went to work for DuPont and was able to develop a couple of patents for DuPont and got some nice bonus checks and gave us enough money to get the studio off the ground. We got together and the decision was Tampa market had no real studios in the area and could use one. So we decided I would move back to Tampa. Jim was still here working on his double E degree and touring in a band. And we decided this would be a good place for us to give it a shot. So we rented a storefront in what is now called Seminole Heights. I don't think back then it had that name, but and that got us off the ground in 1981.
Nice, it's beautiful. Do you guys have like a musical family? Is that something that you kind of like grew up with?
We do. Our father was a trumpet player in a big band in college and when he was in the Army Air Corps in World War II. So we always were exposed to music. My mother grew up in a musical family. In fact, her father owned the biggest music store in Tampa at the time. She's a Tampa native, which makes us actually third generation Floridians.
Except we came back to Tampa because we didn't grow up here.
We didn't grow up here, but she did. So Merle Price had the Price Music Company, the M.L. Price Music Company here in Tampa. It sold pianos and organs and musical instruments, and he was a multi-instrumentalist. Played the Wurlitzer pipe organ at Tampa Theater. As
silent movies.
Right, back in the day. So there's a lot of musical heritage in our family, and we are 2 of 5 kids, and most of us have at least some music ability. So.
But you're the only 2 that work together.
That's
yeah,
correct.
the only 2 that work together. Our sister is a professional musician over in Titusville, and she's also a flute professor, I guess, at UCF. But as USF people, we don't talk about that.
So you guys have spent a lot of time in Florida and Tampa. can you describe some of the changes and how things have evolved? I think you've touched on that a little bit, but maybe more on the nose, or maybe from your perspective of how technology has kind of like evolved in this industry. And how
Well,
you guys are adapting.
the
to that.
technology evolution is kind of industry-wide. So there's kind of two questions. The Tampa music scene is constantly changing. And in the 70s, when I was playing for a living to eat, you would play 6 nights a week in a bar, and they would warn you, please don't play any original music, you'll be fired. So you were basically a human jukebox with your band. But there was, back then, well, you don't remember this, but the drinking age was 18. The bar scene was way more exuberant than it became later on when they raised the drinking age. So musicians were able to make a living playing in the bars, which is what I did while I was in college. And when we got into the recording business, that market fed the recording studios, because the musicians would actually get good at their craft by playing all the time, and then they would begin to write and want to record original music. That, over the intervening 30 whatever years, that's changed quite a bit. There's probably more musicians, talented musicians out there now than there have ever been. It's much harder to make a living doing it now, for lots of reasons. Not just the live music scene, but also the industry wide, and that's the technology part of your question. The technology in our business has changed the end user from someone who is willing to buy albums to someone who just streams music and basically kind of looks at music as sort of a free resource. So it's much harder for musicians, young players, 17, 18-year-old people, to justify becoming a professional musician, because you're not going to make a living doing it. So that trickles down to every part of the music industry. Our part certainly, but also venues for live performances and music stores. It's all changed. So it's not just the Tampa area that we've seen that. We happen to love the area. Both of us came here to go to college. I followed my brother to college because he was in Tampa. That's where I had to go. So it was perfect for me to go there. And USF has a great engineering school, so it made sense. But this has been a great place to raise our families, and you know, it has a combination of big city and small town all in one that we both really like. So that's why we stayed here and why we built our business here. Hopefully that answers your question.
That answers your question. Is there anything that you want to add to that? Or?
Well, I think one of the biggest changes that technology has brought about in our particular business is that it's completely changed the way people make records. The economic incentive, as Jim was talking about, has changed radically due to changes in technology. But even the process of making a record has changed pretty significantly since the mid to late 90s, when computer-based recording started to become affordable and practical for home users. And now it's rare that any project that we work on doesn't have at least some part of it that's been recorded in somebody's bedroom or living room. And prior to the late 90s, that never would have happened.
Couldn't happen.
Right. There was a couple of records Bruce Springsteen came out with, one that he recorded at home on a 4-track cassette called Nebraska, but that was the exception, not the rule. The rule was you had to go to a big studio with giant tape machines and lots of equipment to make an album, and you don't have to do that now. So that technology has not just driven the way the economics work on the downside, the downstream side, it's also changed how we even approach making an album these days.
All right. Well, you guys said you started in 1981. That's kind of the first death metal band that you guys heard of was in 81?
No.
No?
It would have been the first death metal band. The first real metal band that we recorded it became a band called Savatage. They were Avatar when we worked with them. They became Savatage, and now they're called Trans-Siberian Orchestra. And we still work with them. But that was my first exposure to them. Was there was a radio station called the 95 YNF Pirate Station. There was a rock radio station in Tampa. There was 98 Rock and 95 YNF. Those are the two big rock radio stations. And 95 YNF had an album. They did a local album called the Pirate Album.
So it featured recorded songs by local groups
artists
that they did to help promote the local music scene.
And this band, Avatar, a bunch of really young guys, even younger than we were because we were very young, they actually had 2 songs make the cut on the album. We recorded those songs and just hit it off with the guys in the band, also driven by 2 brothers originally. And it's been a long-term relationship. That probably doing that plus their first 2 albums kind of opened us up to metal music as a market for us, because they were kind of getting told by other studios, well, metal's just garbage, doesn't matter, we don't have to try very hard. And we thought, you know, actually trying hard might be good, and maybe making it good would be good. So we worked really hard on this stuff, and so that wasn't anything close to death metal, but it was the first big metal band. I don't think we really saw any death metal until the first version of Obituary.
Right.
So that would have been Executioner in 1985. And even then, it was I had never heard of it before. So that came later.
And that was all kind of Tampa based?
Well,
yeah. So Sabotage and Nasty Savage, thrash metal band from Brandon, and then Obituary was the first, at the time, Executioner was the first death metal band that we had worked with. And about when that kind of came out, we started getting bands from outside of Tampa Bay wanting to come
all over the world, actually, yeah.
Or are they kind of looking at this area? Because, call me naive or uncultured or whatever, but I had no idea that Tampa was considered the death metal capital.
Yeah,
like Nashville's kind of like country. And
right.
I had no
Who
idea.
knew?
I didn't know that.
I mean, it's nothing in the water, I can tell you that. But I think it's just it's more like a Nashville situation where there's just, hey, those guys are there, let's do a gig with them, and then they find. I mean, it's a nice place to live, even if you're a death metal guy, you know. So, I would say that there's a likelihood that what we were doing at the time sort of influenced us as a center, but that's just a part of it. It was a phenomena of the area, and we're just kind of involved in that. It wasn't because of us, but we contributed to it probably. From our way of thinking, it was as big a surprise as anything else. I mean, we're into lots of kinds of music, both of us are. For us, it was a situation, like I said about Sabotage, where, you know, just because they may do a style of music that nobody has heard before doesn't mean you shouldn't do a good job on it and really try to get them what they want. So I think that was kind of apparently in that style of music must have been a novel approach, because we did an awful lot of those records in the late 80s and early 90s. And so I guess we contributed to the Tampa reputation for that.
And we did have some bands that specifically came to Tampa and ended up moving to Tampa to record that style of music.
Yeah, Cannibal Corpse being the first one that comes to my mind is.
Morbid Angel moved down from Virginia. And so we
Cannibal Corpse was from Buffalo, New York.
Yes.
They're upstate New York anyway, and they're all still living here. But so there was a certain. There must have been a camaraderie, you know, amongst all those guys that had nothing to do with us, but so it made the area sort of a cauldron. That's the right word, isn't it?
Cauldron.
A cauldron.
I think is totally appropriate.
All right.
Good. Is there anybody that you've worked with that you've been like, oh my God, I can't believe I'm working with this person? Or has there been like a memorable experience in the studio?
So one of the ones for me earlier on was one of my favorite composers and guitarists in the world is a guy named Steve Morse, not Morris, but M-O-R-S-E.
No relation.
And he had a band that Jim and I both just loved called the Dixie Dregs. And they were a jazz fusion group.
Despite the word Dixie.
Right. Incredible musicians. And Steve went out and did a solo album without the rest of the Dregs, and ended up doing it. He was in Tampa to do a seminar at a music store, and we went to see him and invited him to come see the studio, and he ended up recording most of the album with us in Tampa, which was like, this was a dream. I mean, if somebody could have said, who would you most like to work with in a recording situation, it
I mean,
would have been.
after Paul McCartney, it wouldn't have been very many names down before you got to Steve Morse. Right. I mean, he's certainly one of the most amazing musicians anybody's ever seen, and an idol of ours. And to work with the guy was just frightening. It was so cool.
Yeah.
And what do you want people to know about your new space? We're gonna get B-roll of the space.
Okay.
What do you want the people that are watching this? It'll be like statewide, a little bit out of state. What do you want them to know about how you guys are moving forward?
Well, I think part of the philosophy of this, the way we went about designing and building this space, is that we did consider kind of a new paradigm in recording. And we wanted this to be a much more creative and inspirational space than a traditional recording studio can offer. So not just in terms of, the
Cosmetics, yeah.
right. Not just in terms of cosmetics, but certainly cosmetics has something to do with it. But even down to how do we work with musicians, and in designing the concept of this studio space is that the engineer and producer are in the room with the artists, not separated by glass. And that really ups the level of communication between artist and engineer in a way that when you have that separation, that physical barrier, it's really difficult to overcome at times. And we have found that to be dead on with the clients that we've worked with so far.
We sort of evolved, especially after we sold our other building. We've been doing a lot of work with people in their home studios. We got a ton of experience, and it's pretty useful sometimes. So there's an element of the home recording method that people have to use at home that's really cool, and we've tried to incorporate some of that here. And so the comfort level for the musicians, we think, is much higher. It's a lot less like being in a doctor's office with a microphone. This is more like being in a home environment, except that we have all the technology you could ever want from a big studio. So it's a synergy. That's good. It's a synergy of what we have always done in the past, the big professional studio, and the advantages of home recording, kind of rolled into one thing.
And what was the inspiration behind the aesthetic of kind of the submarine?
Well,
that was an evolution of thought and idea. Starting out as wanting to do something just for fun. And we investigated on our larger isolation booth. I wanted to build a Hobbit Door, literally a Hobbit Door. So I actually started looking up, how do you build a round door? And the problem really came in. You can build a round door and it's not that bad, but soundproofing one was a real challenge. So the round door evolved into a round window, and as soon as you say it's a round window, the porthole thing just jumps to mind, and as soon as you have a porthole, it better have some kind of nautical theme. So we kind of came at it that way.
So that's where some of the pipes and stuff, some of the, it sort of looks like those are you would expect there to be fluid in that thing under pressure. So it's just a fun, one thing about this room is when you're working here and your eyes drift off, there's always something fun to look at, and it's never going to be a situation where you feel stiff about something. It's obvious, fun motif to be in, and it lends itself actually. Some of the technology stuff is kind of handy. The way some of the old school like steampunk technology is sort of handy to run cabling and stuff. So it kind of works, kind of dovetails.
And is there anything that you want to add?
There you go. It's that question. It's that time.
It's that time.
Wow. Well, I would have to say, and I'd be willing to bet like several dollars that this will never get to his ears. But one of the other little inspirations for this room and the method of recording here is we're both big fans of Peter Gabriel, and if you've ever seen his studio in the UK, Real World Studios, it's the first place I ever saw with an SSL console in the middle of a tracking space. And if Peter Gabriel likes it, it's got to be cool. So that's been in the back of our mind while we started figuring out how to actually pull it off. So a nod to Peter Gabriel for part of the idea for the design of the room, I would have to say.
We have to credit Daniel Lenoir for
Daniel
that
Lenoir also, one of Peter Gabriel's producers. But so that comes from it. Another thing about the room, we always struggle with the other studio with like, even because we're not interior decorators by any stretch. We're audio guys, music guys. So it always felt to me like, we just can't make the room feel like your home. It always feels like you're in an office somewhere. So our real goal was to get rid of that thing and make it more of a relaxing, fun place to be. So I think I'm really happy. I think we've pulled it off great. And so far, we officially opened the room up in March, and we've had a great reception. I've had better mixes than this has been a fantastic mix room for me. Really translates well, which in our business, for some of your watchers, what are they? Our viewers? Some of your viewers, they won't know, what is he talking about? But having a mix translate good from this room to another, to the outside world is a big deal. And Tom did a fantastic acoustic design in here. It's kind of hidden, the way the room looks, but it sounds fantastic in here. So we've been really, really happy with that.
So, and tagging on to that, one of the reasons why we set the room up the way we did is that we are seriously interested in doing more in the way of surround mixing. And we're in the process of being able to convert this into a Dolby Atmos room, so an immersive audio 3D environment for mixing.
So a big room like this is very helpful.
Absolutely. It's hard to do that in a small space. And that applies directly to film and television work, because that's where most of the surround mix and the Atmos mixing is applicable. It really hasn't found its way into the audio mix world yet. In fact, years ago, we started doing surround mixing for music, and then the record labels just axed all that budget. When the music business started to plunge in the late 90s, early 2000s, all the surround mix budgets went away. And now it's actually looking like it's going to come back.
It would be really cool. There's no more fun you can have than mixing in surround. It's really,
as an
really
audio
cool.
engineer.
As an audio engineer. Okay. I'm sure, yes, okay, I'll amend that. So yeah, roll over that. As an audio engineer, you can't have more fun than mixing in surround. It's really, really cool. So being able to do it and making sure we had the technology available to do that right is also a big force in this room for us.